know causes problems. Does that mean that in many places, and I'm guessing Lee County is one of them, that there's almost no place that it's safe to put in a wind turbine without risking someone's health? And I think that might well be the case. And then I'm sure some people respond to that by saying, well, what are we supposed to do? I mean, if we can't figure out how to put them in safely, don't we have to do something? Well, putting on my hat as a policy analyst and as somebody who tries to make sense of what the best policy is, I know that sometimes we make public policy decisions that we know are going to hurt some people. But a first step in doing that is to recognize that we're going to hurt some people, to admit that we're going to hurt some people and own up to it, and then point out why this damage is warranted by the benefits that come from the particular activity. I have to tell you that I have never seen any analysis that shows that the net benefits for wind turbines in terms of contributing to the power grid, reducing global warming, whatever it is that they are supposed to accomplish for it. I've never seen someone add those numbers up and say, wow, look at how big these numbers are, and I think that they're big enough that it's worth causing a few people to have to flee their homes because these are, ruining their family's health. Now, I understand from the local perspective that typically global warming isn't high on the agenda, and rather that the potential tax revenues are important. But I think about it again from my public policy point of view. If you need a few $100,000 more, one way to get it is to confiscate the homes of some local citizens, which obviously we would all agree is not not a good thing. We don't want to be that kind of people. And yet, putting these wind turbines near many people's homes has remarkably similar effects to just confiscating them. And this is why I find this to be an important topic to work on. This is why I travel across the country and fly in and come to late meetings, not because there's any hope that I'll get rich or even make a living doing this, but because I've seen too many people suffer from this and want to make sure that people understand what this suffering is like. In any case, if the notion here in this county is that we don't really know quite how bad this problem is, I'm not sure. I believe Phillips's analysis. Maybe there is a big problem, maybe there isn't. Might I suggest waiting and revisiting the topic 6 or 12 months from now? I mean, after all, if it's really true that there aren't big problems, then 6 or 12 more months isn't going to produce any more evidence out there in the world that there's a big problem out there, and little will be lost. The opportunities will still be there. The possibility of building will still be there. On the other hand, if, as I would predict, that amount of time is going to result in more and more and more and more accumulated information about why this is such a harmful idea, then everybody will be able to make decisions based on a better understanding without having to fund a brand new Lee County study or anything like that, but simply by waiting for the information that's already rolling in. So thank you for your time and letting me monologue, and I would be quite happy to take questions.
Thank you. Is there anyone from the board here that's got some questions or would like to ask him anything?
Is the government doing any studies on this themselves?
Not that I know of. The studies, the Australian government has started to take this very seriously, and I think they're actually pursuing some studies. As far as I know, that the United States government, the individual states, the Canadian provinces are not themselves supporting this. And to editorialize a bit in response to the question, unfortunately, the United States government has sort of boxed itself into the policy of supporting this type of project and finds it politically very difficult to to pursue these questions. And, you know, everybody saw in the news what happened with the pursuit of solar energy by the U.S. government. I suspect that this is going to become an equal embarrassment sometime in the future, but for obvious reasons, people like to put off finding that out. So community groups have, you know, or people like me running independent research, often, you know, typically on a volunteer basis, have been responsible for most of the studies. Even still, we've, you know, gotten some very high-quality studies for amazingly low budgets, nothing that we'd ever imagine being able to do in a university, I can tell you.
So why do you say wait 6 to 12 months? What's going to be available in 6 to 12 months that's in this pipeline?
There are 2 or 3 more systematic studies that have information trickling out. There are some that just surprise me and pop out of nowhere, like the New Zealand study that I just mentioned that just came across my desk a couple of days ago, and I didn't even know it was in the works. So I suspect that there are many more of those that will happen, coming from people I've never talked to or never met. The organization of the adverse event reporting and that type of information is definitely underway. It's getting, you know, more clear and more systematic. And, you know, perhaps as importantly as anything, there is no information coming in pointing in any other direction. You know, every 3 months, every 6 months that passes without somebody coming out with a study that suggests, no, there really isn't a problem here, is pretty compelling evidence that there really is a problem here. I suspect that, I venture to say, and, you know, perhaps I'm being optimistic because, of course, you know, you can read my view about this quite easily. I suspect that a year from now, that almost nobody is going to be considering this to be a good idea. You know, nobody from the perspective of public policy decision makers. I think that the opinion will pretty strongly coalesce around what, you know, I am contending is the scientific truth. And perhaps someone will come along and say the benefits of this are so huge that they warrant those costs. Frankly, I'm very skeptical that that's going to happen. It might, but I think the ability of this industry and its supporters to continue to claim that these costs don't exist, the days for that are very numbered.
Any other questions? Yeah, Mike?
Well, the story we heard when we put the first wind turbines in the county almost 10 years ago was that there hadn't been any production in the United States for years, and that most of the production of wind energy had been over Netherlands or whatever on a continuous basis since since electricity was started. Has there been any more problems showing up in the Netherlands, those areas that have had wind turbines for the last 75 years, where the United States hasn't used them for 75 years? Or are those smaller ones, or do you see a size being a part of the problem too, or not?
Yes, size is undoubtedly a part of the problem, and you're exactly right. Those are much smaller. They just keep getting bigger and bigger. And it would be nice to know. I mean, that's one of the answers that more research could tell us. It could tell us that, you know, these 40-story high towers that are sort of the current technology just cause too much impact over too wide an area, but something, you know, something more right-sized is productive and efficient and doesn't cause these impacts. That would be great to know. We don't know that. As you suggest, the Netherlands data, the relatively small number of adverse event reports coming out of that population suggest that you know, that there perhaps is a right-sized technology, that there is a right offset, that, you know, offshoring is a good idea, for example. That you know, certainly gets it away from people. Unfortunately, it's not so clear-cut because, as I said, there have started to be protests even in the, you know, traditional happy homes of this technology over in Northern Europe.
Any other questions, comments? Yeah, Mike?
No, go ahead.
don't see depression as a symptom out of this.
Any other questions, comments? No.
You made the comment one time that you don't see depression as a symptom out of this.
Perhaps as what you might call a secondary or tertiary symptom, that is someone who experiences a long period of stress disorders might fall into a depression as a result of that. I don't think anybody is claiming that sort of a primary effect is, a week after the turbines go online, people start having diagnosable depression symptoms very often. It certainly shows up in some of the reports, but it's not one of the 4 or 5 really consistent diseases that appear over and over again, very consistent, in almost all of them.
Could you give an explanation for that?
For why it doesn't happen?
Yeah, that surprises me.
Well, I mean, I'm not an expert in depression, but I'm aware that the sort of current public health conventional wisdom is that depression should usually be attributed to a particular chemical imbalance in the brain, one that isn't related to the corticosteroids, the stress type reactions. And in general, those don't tend to go together. Anxiety and depression, a long period of having these social problems might throw someone into sort of a caused depression, but the things that cause anxiety are not typically the ones that cause depression.
So this whole thing about cause and effect, there's a certain percentage of the population that is going to have these symptoms no matter where they live, I assume. Have you taken all that into account when you look at these adverse effect reports?
Well, I mean, that's why the case crossover aspect of them is so compelling, because I mean, you are entirely right. Of course, the coincidences happen. So if we see a story where someone says, I lived, I just found out that there's toxic waste leaking into the groundwater where I live, and I got cancer, and my neighbor got cancer. That's difficult to make much sense of, because you don't know exactly when the cancer started and so forth, because lots of people get cancer, lots of people have headaches. But not very many people start having chronic constant headaches or chronic constant fatigue in any given week. Somebody who has that condition and has had it for a long time, there was some week, a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when that started happening. But what we can observe is the onset, to use the economics jargon, incidence rather than the prevalence. Prevalence refers to something being there, existing at a particular time. Incidence refers to, you can see when it happened or when it went away. And we can get, we have these reports of people who didn't have a history or didn't report a history of any of these diseases, who said, I thought the wind farm was a great idea. I was looking forward to being a part of it. But a week and a half after it went online, this started happening to my child, and this started happening to me. Last summer we went away for the summer and stayed somewhere else. And 2 days after we got there, these problems went away. But the week we returned home, they came back. And it's that type of pattern that makes it very different from, a lot of people out there have headaches at any given time. But they didn't start when the exposure started, end when the exposure ended, restart when the exposure started. And that's what actually makes this a surprisingly easy topic to study once you start sifting through the evidence that's out there. Much easier to make sense of than something like cancer, which is extremely difficult to study.
So to follow up on that, I'm just trying to be cynical about this.
Yep.
Have you looked at the adverse effects